Hello, my friend, and welcome to another edition of these special webinars that we've been doing about taking care of your mental health as a professional wrestler. This is part 10. Wow, that's pretty cool, of this series. And it is a follow-up from part 9, which we talked about substance use and abuse in professional wrestling. This will be sort of an addition to that. And we have a special guest tonight to share his story and advice on the subject matter. And if you want to listen or watch to any of the previous webinars, they're all located on the YouTube channel. And as always, I'm joined by the resident experts, Carl and Kyle, who run our monthly support groups. They are in professional wrestling and experts in the mental health field. So it's sort of a beautiful thing, the best of both worlds. So if you want to join those support groups or join the Facebook group, message us after this or during this or while you're listening to this or literally anytime so we can get you sort of the support or the resources that are available. But that's my pitch. That's my intro. I'm Aaron. I used to be a professional wrestler named Jackson Stone. Now I just try to do this stuff in the mental health field. So Carl, Kyle, Jimmy, welcome. Thanks for coming along.
Pleasure as always.
Yeah, excited for this one.
Thanks for having me on, gentlemen. I always enjoy anytime I can get in on a good conversation, particularly when it's not about pro wrestling and the sort of stuff I'm a little bit more passionate about, which is sort of how to navigate through this thing we call life and this place we call reality.
So to pop it off, how are you navigating life in your current day?
Oh boy, those are big questions. Anytime someone asks me like, how are you? It's like, do you wanna sit in on this? I'm let me put this succinctly. I'm working towards letting go of a lot of stuff I've accumulated, particularly maybe over the last year, and letting go of some of that to flow a little easier through my life.
What's your day-to-day look like these days?
Yeah, so boy, this every morning I'm going for a walk. That's something. I took a surfing lesson today. I did that. There's a sort of a spiritual / movement coach that I work with. I just signed up for a like a sexual like course, like online sexual course. That's I think a big part of the that's part of, at least for me, I've got a map of reality I like, and it's pretty good. And then over sex, it's a little clouded, and I've been sort of putting my head in the sand as far as that goes for a long time. And it's I can speak for myself, being I've been so disconnected from my body for so long. It's about time to connect with my body, connect with my sexuality, connect with my masculinity is something that's only happened over the last couple years. So there are all these sort of pockets in the persona, pockets in the self, even you could say, that need attention. And so I'm doing my best to give attention to what's calling for me to give attention to it.
I think a lot about masculinity. Not only in like a professional wrestling space and how that's exemplified, but also to the young boys that I coach on a baseball team. So how do you think about masculinity, Jimmy? Is there something that you can succinctly define as like healthy masculinity? It's hard. I've been thinking about it a lot. I've come up with, I think, is a Jedi. I was watching some Star Wars, and a Jedi, I was like, oh, I think I can say that looking at a Jedi, they embody a lot of qualities that I think healthy masculinity could resemble in sort of modern life, without lightsabers and hopefully without war and things of that nature. But like the way they carried themselves, and I can go deeper into that, but I'll let you go on that journey.
That's a great one. I love that. I love the Jedi. I don't know if it'll be succinct, but I look at, gender from a principle of reality, right? The yin and yang, the yin and yang. In the Hermetic tradition, one of the 7 laws is principles of reality is the law of gender. And so I see the pattern of gender, of these masculine and feminine energies playing out through all of reality. In fact, I would say the union of the masculine and feminine is what creates reality itself. And so that pattern plays out all throughout reality. And one of the places it plays out is within human beings, and specifically within males and females. And so to me, it's first understanding what is masculine and what is feminine, defining those things, as you have the penetrative principle, the principle of order, the principle of boundaries, of this over here, right? And over here you have the sort of receptive principle, the principle of openness, the principle of caring, the principle of acceptance, the principle of mercy, the principle of severity is over here, right? So it's understanding, to me, first what those things are, and then how they manifest themselves in the level of the human being, and in the level of the male and the female. So I said it wasn't going to be succinct, because this comes down to a basic principle of reality. And so when I think of healthy masculinity, I think of masculinity that is balanced with femininity. Like the proper masculine, for the way a man should show up in the world, it is balanced with feminine energy, but has a steeper tilt towards the masculine principles, and it all serves the highest good. When those things are out of balance, when you have no care that offsets the strength and justice and severity, if you have no mercy, if you have no care, if you have no sort of love over here, this becomes tyrannical here. So it must be offset. And both those things working in union must serve what's the ideal. They must serve the ideal. If they're self-serving, that becomes a distorted version of masculinity as well.
I think that was very succinct. So I'll give yourself some credit there. That was beautiful. Carl, Kyle, anything to add?
I mean, I'm already loving the direction that this is taking. And I think, especially, I know we weren't going to make this specifically about professional wrestling, but I also think about like what Jimmy's saying in the context of, having seen his matches and seeing your career. And I mean, this might be a little bit of a base question, but at least in the things that you're talking about, I'm kind of curious, like the course of your education when it comes to your perspective on, gender influences, if it's fair to put it that way. If you really could, like, where did you really start becoming interested in these ideals, and where did they start really, where did you really start feeling like you needed to express these ideas, especially in the context of professional wrestling? Because I mean, not to mince words, you have a tremendous influence, especially on the way people express gender in that context today.
Well, thank you. Yeah. So for most of my life, I was under the impression that gender was sort of like a construct, right? Which is a popular notion now. And I grew up on the album "Free to Be You and Me," of going, a boy and girl, they're kind of the same thing. And look, they're the male human animal and the female human animal are mostly the same. I mean, mostly the same, but there are some differences, right? But I grew up sort of like that. We're kind of like, I don't have time for your gender roles. I don't have time for your gender construct. I was the zombie princess. It was like, yeah, I'll wear nail polish and eyeliner, and I'll still stab you in the face with a spike, right? And when I look at that now, I look at the expression that was of like the dark feminine that was being expressed externally, that was within me. My perception on gender changed when I started to sort of dig further into esoteric philosophy and understanding that I wasn't seeing, I didn't understand gender from a fundamental sense. right? From the sense of the yin and yang, from the sense of this is what pervades all of reality. And I think gender is one of the most fundamental principle. It shows up in everything we do. You know, when I lay in bed and I go, oh, should I work out today? It's a matter of, do I want to have discipline today? Or do I want to sort of have grace with myself today and relax, right? And so these two principles are always at play with all of our decisions. They're always at play. We're always discussing where to put boundaries and where to open up those boundaries, right? The masculine is the boundary, the feminine is openness. And we're always discussing how, like, where boundaries should be. And you're always having that in your life, in your conversations, in your relationships with people. You're always putting down boundaries or letting up boundaries or creating some fluidity to these boundaries. So reality is the dance between the masculine and feminine principles. So it seemed completely ignorant and full of sort of hubris to go, oh, it's all a construct. Like, no, it's not in a fundamental sense. You can say some of what we think of as masculinity in men and some of what we think of as femininity in women, some of that is absolutely socially constructed. But as principles, they, you know, they're all of reality. They're part of all of reality. So for me, once I saw that, I'm like, oh, I'm not connected to the sort of thing that I am, which is a human male. And where is that maleness? And where is that masculinity? And how does it present itself? Where am I not showing up as a man, as the sort of creature that I am? I'm talking about the nature of the sorts of things that we are. And oh, is this like constricting my life because I think, oh, I don't need this. I don't need, you know, strength. I don't need to feel anger. I don't need to feel, you know, like I want to dominate something. I don't want to feel those things. Like, and, you know, we sort of curl up into, you know, shying away from what we think of as are these like awful traits, but there's a part of the animal that we are that wants to express it. And so it becomes a matter of, how do I express that in a healthy manner? How do I lead my life in a healthy manner and be an example to other people to lead their lives? I mean, that's really the masculine principle. So much of it is, it's the penetrative principle. Again, we see it manifest in the phallus. You know, it manifests all over the place, and it's the leadership principle. It's masculinity is that which leads by definition. And when we shy away from leading our own lives, we shy away from that energy, from that principle. Yeah.
I love your perspectives here, Jimmy. Just how like energy and finding clarity. It's like everything's a journey, everything's a progress. And I see masculinity a lot in that. It's a progress, it's learning, it's making these mistakes and having to learn how to be gentle with yourself, like you said. In the time that you've been in recovery, how has that benefited you in your journey so far of like discovering these parts of yourself?
Yeah. And to clarify, there's of course masculinity and femininity in everybody. Like that, we are looking for the balance in those two things, and we're looking. Yeah. I mean, it shows up in the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere of the brain. I mean, it literally just shows up everywhere. And so what we're looking for is the balance. And this is age-old philosophy. This isn't you know, there's an esoteric saying, there's nothing new under the sun, and it's like, correct. There's nothing new under the sun. Reality is what it is. And you know, sometimes we stray from the path, and sometimes we have to sort of course correct, get back on it. So I mean, look, in my journey, like, it's so important to acknowledge all the parts of myself. And there are parts where there is shame and there is pain and there's all sorts of things hiding under places that I don't even know they're hidden, or I know they're hidden somewhere, but I don't know where I put the key. Because we're such weird, complex creatures. When someone says that they know themselves, it's just like, I laugh at it. It's like, you have no idea who you are. Really, we know what sort of the outer layer of our mind tells us. We think we're doing something for one reason, but like there's a deeper meaning behind all of it, right? And so you have, like, for me, I've had to acknowledge these parts and continue to, and this is partly why you signed up for this sex and sort of workshop, is going, I grew up Catholic, so there's, shame and there's guilt, there's all these different sort of stories that are wrapped underneath that, and going, I have to uncover this. Like, if I don't, that which is in the shadows will pull the strings. And it's only through the illumination of all the parts of me that I can even begin just to understand myself. Because I think that's part of the real journey, is just an understanding. Like, I don't need to necessarily change everything I do. It's just to go, why, hey man, why are you doing this? And to have that like clarity of going, oh, okay, this is the need that this perversion meets. Like, oh, I still vape like a freaking maniac. And it's going, you go, oh, you're just addicted to nicotine, it's oral fixation, you like having something in your hand. It's like, it's way, way, way deeper than that. It just manifests itself as vaping. I tried to get to the bottom of it one time, and the stuff that came out of me when I really went down the feeling of like letting go of it, like what would that feel like if I let go of vaping? The stuff that came up, the resistance that went like, what? I don't get to have just something. I don't get to have like just a crutch, like a vice, a thing to hold on to. I gave up drugs. I need to give up this too. Do I need to give up everything? I just have to do this all by myself, all alone, all in the fucking world. I have to do it all by myself. Like, that's what came up when I thought about letting, when I felt into letting go of vaping. So it's through these parts of ourselves, we get to see the needs that we're trying to meet by all of our actions. And then by integrating these parts, we can create a union. Ultimately, that's what we're aiming to do, is create a union within ourselves. So all of our parts are working together to serve the same thing, as opposed to going all these different ways. And why am I always battling with myself? Why is it always a fight? Why is it always a struggle? It's like, well, it's not integrated. That's why.
Yeah. This journey, though, has to be one that's voluntary. I've come to learn, because you can consume best practices, and I'm glad you're listening or watching to this. That's great. And you could be told as many times that you could potentially make this change. This might improve your life, or you may do this too much, or this is a crutch, or this is holding you back. But we have to come to an acceptance within ourselves first, and then make the voluntary decision. I think people get self-acceptance wrong. I think they think it's like, if I accept myself, then I'm just this is who I am. I'm complacent. This is me forever. I think the opposite. I think once you accept yourself as you are in this moment, then you can actually strive to improve. Because if you don't accept that this is your starting point, we've talked about reality, right? I can't fight against reality. If I'm, 300 pounds overweight, but I tell myself that I'm in shape, that's fighting against reality. You're not going to win. So if you are that, I'm accepting my starting point. I'm voluntarily taking on this absolutely treacherous journey, but it's going to be way better than if I didn't do anything. Sort of thinking about the consequences of action or inaction. I think the consequences of action are probably pay a greater benefit. And so I think it boils down to that, right? Voluntarily choosing that, okay, this is my path now. Yeah, you've probably been punched in the face a few times. There's probably been a bunch of signs that you ignored, right? Potentially if there's drugs involved or things of that nature, right? Some of those substances. But then, ultimately it's pain, for me at least, was the indicator that I needed to change. Normally it is for some people, but having sort of proactive conversations like this, maybe you can get ahead of it just like a little bit and say, all right, this is my choice. I'm going to voluntarily go on this battle and go on the hero's journey and try to slay the dragon. I'm going to get cut along the way, but maybe I'll armor myself along the way as well. And so I think what you're alluding to, Jimmy, I think is an important point there about, voluntarily choosing this path.
Yeah, man, there's so much in there. It's like, yes, you have to. And at the end, when it comes down to it, I mean, this is the truth. When it comes to drug addiction or any behavior, at the real base of it, at the real end of it, it is just a decision. And you might think it's like, no, but I want to, but I can't. It's like, no, you don't want to. You want to stop, but more of you wants to continue. And that's why they call that sort of rock bottom. Rock bottom is the place where the consequences of reality, which pain, to your point, is an indication from reality. It's feedback from the feedback system of reality to go, you're out of alignment, man. And it will keep punching you, it will keep hitting you until at some point you go, the consequences are too much. I choose not drugs over this. I don't know what not drugs looks like. I have no idea what's on the other side of that, but I choose that no matter what, because this is done. And it's a choice, man. It really is. That's what I've seen, man. There's no way around it.
When
did your personal story begin with drug use?
I was like I didn't drink in high school. I like drank like once or twice or something, but I prided myself on not. These other kids are partying. I was a pro wrestler, man. I was following my dream. I went through a hard breakup at like 20, and then when I was 20, 21, I took my first 2 Vicodin, and it was like, that was it, man. I took those first 2, and it was like there had been a weight on my chest for my entire life, and then all of a sudden I could just breathe. And I wanted that relief so bad that I spent more or less the next 12 years just trying to get that relief.
Where did pro wrestling play a part in all of that?
Pro wrestling well, certainly it was in the pro wrestling world that I got that stuff, but pro wrestling kept me away from drugs for a long time, right? It kept me away from drugs and drinking throughout my teenage years. I didn't pick up any of my bad habits until my 20s. It played a role in that, like, we sort of like joked around about it and glorified it, like we're gonna be like the old school wrestlers, brother, pop some pills, drink some booze, fuck the rats, minus the rats, but it was like that, and it was like we were doing a parody of what we had heard about people doing, but the parody just became my life at some point.
I think about that a lot, sort of because pro wrestling's so interesting, right? It's like you're going to play a character, some sort of version of yourself, right? There's some truth in there. Then you think about what the people did before you, and you're trying to play that character as well, mixed in with who you want to be, because most people get into pro wrestling because they were bullied or, whatever the case. So they're trying to be this version of themselves that they couldn't be when they were bullied. So you're just like mixing like a version of you want to be, a version of you you're playing, a version of pro wrestling that you knew came before you that you're also trying to play. It's like a mixture of so many different identities wrapped up in one thing. And so I think when then the show is over, per se, like what do we do? Do you have that sort of feeling? I mean, that wasn't very coherent, but
yeah, I mean, wrestling's interesting because you're a character on top of a character on top of a character, right? And you don't know where Chris Scoville begins and Jimmy Jacobs ends, and then where the drugs begin and I end, and it became for me just one muddled thing. There's this soup of distortions. I don't like to lay down like my drug use at the feet of pro wrestling much at all, to be honest with you. I'm sure had its role insofar that it did. But I wasn't say I was like a lone wolf doing it, but for a large part, it wasn't easy to find drugs in a wrestling locker room, believe it or not. And I tried plenty. I'm not saying it's not there, but I don't know if I could, like, since I don't have experience in another culture per se, I don't know if it's more prevalent, drug use is more prevalent in wrestling nowadays, or even over the last 15 years, than other places. But I don't like to lay it down at the feet of pro wrestling. I like to go. It seems more appropriate to look at myself and the void I was trying to fill, the distractions I was trying to achieve, and the pain that I was trying to suppress. Like, that seems like the better level of analysis for it, for me. Now, does wrestling attract people that have the sort of personalities, insecurities, wounds, and traumas that might be the sort of characters that like to end up in the drug world too? It's like, that's possible. Yeah.
I mean, I like that you're saying that you don't want to lay it at the feet of pro wrestling. I feel like you're only saying that as someone who's on the healing journey, right? Who's taking responsibility for their actions. Someone potentially not on that journey would lay blame at something outside of themselves. And so I think that's also an important marker, not only for you, but for other people who may be trying to get to the place where they can take responsibility for their actions, be accountable for what they did, and then sort of move forward, with that, trying to heal through that. But Carl, anything to add?
I've had a point I've been marinating on for a second there. I've just been thinking about how to articulate it. Jimmy, especially as somebody who started, pro wrestling as a teenager, and you haven't gotten into, the one thing I hear about in our groups is it's either the grind or the desire to partake in the grind of pro wrestling, in which I mean, train as much as possible, be as busy as much as possible, be in the car, be at the shows, do everything you possibly can to make it. I don't want to, again, it's not one of those things you want to absolutely attribute to pro wrestling, but it's it's sort of the formula that looks like it's worked for a whole lot of people who have made it in the places and spaces that we generally as pro wrestlers want to be in. I suppose my question, and it's kind of referring back to a point you had made earlier about having grace with yourself. How do you? I'm curious at what point for you really started adopting the mantra of having grace for oneself, and if you feel like you had to reconcile that with the sort of general attitude one is kind of expected to take when approaching pro wrestling, to engage with that grind, as opposed to having grace with oneself and giving oneself a break.
Well, in the pro wrestling world, that grace only came far later, when it stopped being the most important thing in my life. Right. In my 20s, I would say that was the most important thing in my life, to the detriment of me. And look, to my point about grace, it's like, give yourself grace, but don't give yourself all the grace in the world, because then you're not going to do anything. Right. That's the grace in the feminine principle. If just left without a counterpart of having some discipline and structure, you'll just turn into nothing. You'll turn into just a slovenly blob over here. Right. So grace is important when balanced with some sort of discipline or some sort of structure. But that was not something I gave myself, certainly in my 20s. It was on the road every single weekend. If I had a weekend off, that was no good. I'm going to, continue. I don't like, and that is a difficult that is a difficult life, but it doesn't, I don't know, I have mixed feelings about it. I do. I have very mixed feelings about it. And I guess I'll just be honest here because I don't have it figured out. Great, that's good. I'll say something that's not in my script. Because I have a lot of love for that life in my 20s of putting all my chips on something in a completely unbalanced way. Going like, let's just put all my chips onto this thing and sacrifice everything else at the feet of this thing. And, you know, greatness happens then. I don't know how else greatness happens without an imbalance, right? Without sort of sacrificing everything else. Now, look, in my 30s, like I'm good with that. Like I want the balance in my life because me taking care of me is the most important thing, and everything it cascades from that. But yeah, I can't tell anybody don't go nuts, you know, don't go crazy on something, because that's an experience in life you can have, and there's a lot to it. But don't be surprised at the end of it when there's nothing on the other side. You know, the only thing on the other side of like all of that is just, it's you. And that's why I found in my 30s the lesson of like, oh, so I have to be okay with me. That's because there's nothing else. It's all, you can run, or you're a dog chasing your tail. That's all that's happening over here. And it's fun, but you can do that. And you can drive yourself mad, and you can have the ups and downs and go on that roller coaster. That can be an experience you have in life. And that's okay. But just know that's what it is.
Kyle, you got a follow up?
I mean, I think that was absolutely brilliant. And I think I can just kind of, you know, succinctly or summarize that answer as it's like, yeah, go for the ride, but wherever you can find grace for yourself, you know, apply it. And, you know, I think it is what Jimmy said. We can't necessarily tell anybody not to like throw themselves completely into this thing and, you know, not chase the dream, because he's right. Where else does greatness happen? It is the people who are staying late. It is the people who are at training every single day. It is the people who are showing up, you know, every weekend to shows. Those are the folks who are progressing, and those are the ones who are, you know, for the most part, in and out. You know, you put in what you get out what you put in. So I think in terms of just how that one answer really kind of changed my perspective is like, it's not preparing. It's, you can sit there and you can be a god, like an assist on the trip, it seems. But I think, at least in terms of our work, I'm beginning to wonder if it's like, well, maybe we do need to pay more attention to like what is on the other side, and how it does work out for other people, how for just anybody. I don't know. I'm just kind of just rattling off here, because no, truly, I did appreciate that answer, Jimmy.
Yeah, and look, there's balance even to be had just sort of in the day-to-day, right? You don't need to be running with all the built up tension in your body all the time as well. There's balance in just taking a moment to breathe. I love taking a moment to breathe. It's like my favorite thing to do, is see that I'm holding tension in my body and just going, it's okay. And I notice it in all these sorts of different places. And so there's things like that that can relieve tension sort of throughout the journey. And you don't need to be a madman either for success. You know, you're allowed to, because you're allowed to do whatever you want. But if you're the sort of person that's struggling now and going, this is too much for me, then now is a perfect time to take a breath, not just in this moment, but big picture, take a breath and go, what am I serving here? What am I doing? Do I want to make pro wrestling my God? Why? And what's on the other side of it? Do I think if I get a big contract with WWE or AEW, do I think that then I'll be okay? Do I think that's where happiness lies? Which is such a preposterous notion, because how many people have those big contracts and are miserable? You know, so it's when it becomes too much, the people in this group who might be listening to this and going, this is madness, this is too much. Like, you don't need to engage in the madness. You don't need to. You can take a look back and look at the parts of yourself and wonder, why is it that I'm doing what I'm doing? What need is this serving? And you might be able to find a much more reasonable way to meet your own need without driving yourself crazy.
Yeah, this is another interesting thing that I always think about, because I work in sport, and this sort of one track specialization, obsessive minded thing is talked about at length. And I think there's some pretty good evidence now for this, is the fact that to do anything great, you have to work hard. So we can just like put that to the side. If you don't work hard, sorry, you're just not going to get anywhere. So that's like a prerequisite. That's like step 0. Like, sort of like listening is to having a good conversation. If you don't listen, the conversation's not going to be good. Okay. So hard work is the prerequisite, which is what like we're ingrained as pro wrestlers to think about, which is good. Some stuff is a little not okay, but that's maybe a different conversation for another time. But we'll just say hard work is the prerequisite. And as wrestlers, you're usually working like a normal indie schedule. I don't know any other schedule because I've never been a contracted professional wrestler, but normal indie schedule is Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, sometimes Thursday. So the other days of the week, what are you doing? Now, if we can implement some rest and recovery protocols in those days where you are not sacrificing everything on those days, maybe you're training a little bit, you're still hitting the gym, maybe you have a meditation practice, maybe you journal, maybe you take an ice bath, a cold shower, maybe you get 8 hours of sleep, actual real sleep, instead of being in the car or on a plane, right? So there's a Monday through Thursday, potentially maybe a few shorter days, right? But there's at least 2, 3, 4 days in there where we can really hone in on some of these recovery protocols, these mental health practices, maybe bettering some relationships in our life, creating a support system. And then when we get on the grind, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, it's not as taxing when the thing comes to an end. I still have something to look at. I still have something to share with. Someone can still give me my flowers because I built a relationship, not 75, but like 1 or 2 that are still in your life. And you've decided to prioritize sleep or build some of these habits in. So that's what the people at the very tip top of the sport are doing. Say the best in the world, Olympics, all of these stuff. So if we can try and do that as just mere independent professional wrestlers, yes, we don't have some of the resources or the financial, but you don't really need all of that stuff to get 8 hours of sleep. You don't need anything. You just need to make a diligent, deliberate practice to say, I'm going to get some sleep. You have a shower, do cold for 2 minutes, right? All of these things can help you recover just a little bit better so you can work as hard and be that obsessive on the thing that you love the most. And then when it all comes to an end, you look at yourself and you're like, okay, I gave my best effort. Like, there's no regrets. I built a couple of relationships. I have some of my best buddies who came from pro wrestling. The memories are great. They're going to be at my wedding or whatever the thing is, right? But there is still things to be done while still committing to the grind. If you want to be great, if you just want to do it for a hobby, fucking that's awesome too. Great. Love it. Fantastic. Cool for pro wrestling. But if this is your deal, then you got to commit to the grind. But there's so many things that you should be doing that will benefit you so you don't fall into the trap of whatever happens with pro wrestlers, drugs, overdose, sex, our mental health suffers, things of that nature. If we can commit to these practices and be just as disciplined as pursuing our goal and as disciplined as pursuing these practices for our mental, physical, emotional health, then we might be just a little bit ahead of the curve. Not saying it's going to be perfect. There'll still be struggles and setbacks and all of these things that you have to deal with, but you'll just be a little bit better off. Your armor will just be a little bit stronger as you embark on the hero's journey. And that's what I think I've learned the most from being sort of in sport over the last couple of years. And I think it relates perfectly to professional wrestling, as it's a mix of sport and entertainment at sort of the highest level that people want to reach. So I think that's important.
I love all that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think about this a lot anyways. But Jimmy, do you have any I don't know if advice is the right word because I don't really like to give advice, but I'll just use that because I don't have a larger vocabulary to have another word for advice.
Oh, I have something.
Oh,
I have
Carl, go
something.
ahead. Yeah, please.
Yeah, Aaron. Because I like, we've used this kind of reframing a lot, like having a toolbox. So, having these things at the ready, like Jimmy mentioned, breathing, taking that moment for himself to be in the moment. Rest and relaxation when you can get it, scheduling it in. I'm curious about what else is in Jimmy's toolbox that other, wrestlers might think would be helpful.
Yeah, I mean,
Perfect.
look, to me, it's like breathing is first, and it is. It's first because, and if I'm holding tension in my body or feeling stress, like I can't do anything until that's sort of taken care of. So to me, it's all about releasing that tension first and getting out of this sort of fight or flight mode of like, this thing's going on, I need to be active about it, need to do something, and I'm about to just be triggered into some sort of weird impulsive behavior. For me, breathing's like the first thing, but I also sometimes do stuff with my body. Sometimes I do some of this stuff, just like shake it out, depending on where I'm at. I scream. I'm a screamer sometimes, especially like in the car. Sometimes I'll just like, I'll feel it and I'll just like let it out. It's stuff like that to, when it has to do with like holding tension in my body, which is basically anytime I'm stressed, anytime I'm in a situation where I'm like, this is too much, guy. I need to say something about this. I need to do something about what's going on in front of me. Someone should get yelled at right now. Whatever, when all of that sort of comes up, breathing is the first one. And in a bigger picture sense, it's just putting things into perspective. Again, it depends on what the situation is, but a change of perspective to go, if it's something that, I'm upset about, it's like, how much, does me being upset about it change it? If I don't like it, what can I do about it? Can I accept it first and then make a determination after I accept that this is just the way things are? Do I want to, still wrestle for this company or not? And, for me, a lot of it is just understanding that I am the decider of my life. And you're not boxed into anything. Like, you don't like have to wrestle for $20 if you don't want to. You don't have to make this drive if you don't want to. You don't have to anything. You don't have to be a pro wrestler. You don't have to keep up with the Joneses. You don't have to keep up with anybody. You're playing a game with yourself, and you get to sort of make the rules for you as far as like what works for me. What do I want to deal with? What do I not want to deal with? And so that's a big part of it for me is, breathing, moving my body. Sometimes it's making sounds. Going outside is a good one too. Going outside is nice. And a change in perspective, and just always holding the perspective that nothing in my experience, generally speaking, is other than the laws of reality. Nothing in my experience has control over me. That I am the decider of my life. And if I don't like anything that's going on in front of me, I can either do my best to interact with it in a way that will alter it, or I can go and play a different game. Like, I'm allowed to do what I want. I'm an adult. That's a tool. That's a tool, is realizing that like you're in control of your life. Yeah.
That's a huge tool, to realize that you have the ability to control your attention, your effort, how you respond, all of those great things. Yeah. Oh, I was also thinking about grace, in terms of, all of these virtues that we can embody, right? All virtues have a vice of excess and a vice of deficiency, right? So you just want to be able to, we're not perfect. Like, I'm sorry to tell you, none of us here are perfect. You're not perfect, and no perfect person has ever existed. So we can just release that idea. but we want to try and walk that sort of dynamic equilibrium in sort of the middle of this vice of excess and vice of deficiency, especially when it comes with grace, right? Because there are times in your life where you kind of need to grit it out a little bit. Like you're right there. Like, oh, you're right there. You feel like no one's watching, no one's listening, no one cares. That means you're close. And there are also times where like your right knee really hurts and you can barely jump on it. And like you're still wrestling matches. Like maybe yeah, you might lose your spot. So what? Your health is at stake here. That's a little bit more important. Like, or, whatever, any of like that. So there are things like that where you sort of have to be able to, if you're in touch with yourself and your body, like Jimmy's talking about, using the breath as sort of your life force and your best friend, you can feel it. You trust your gut enough to be able to know, okay, I can grit through this, or this is like quite serious. Maybe I should see a doctor or a therapist or whatever the case may be. That's just one example out of many, in terms of, vice of excess or deficiency. But I think that's important as well. So Jimmy, I have another question for you. Young wrestler, probably struggling with his identity in the ring and outside of the ring. What would you say about that?
Inside of the ring and outside of the ring, I probably have two different realms of advice for that. Identity is a funny thing, and I think it's more malleable than we think sometimes. I guess I'll just speak from experience and going, for so much of my life, I thought I was this thing. I thought I was this thing. His name's Chris, and Chris has these likes and dislikes, and he has these things that he does and things that he's good at, things that he's not good at, and that's what Chris is, and that it's this thing. And it wasn't until in my 30s at some point I saw how malleable that was. It's not infinitely malleable. It's not like I'm never going to be 7 feet tall, right? There's definitely things that it does have solid structure, but that what I identify as does have a lot of malleability to it. So I identified as someone who is, I'm just an emotional guy. That's who I am. I'm an emotional guy. That's who I am. And then I just at some point saw, no, I don't have practice of managing my emotions properly. That's all. In fact, I'm mostly scared of feeling my emotions. Actually, that's more of the problem is my expression of my emotions. It's not that I'm an emotional guy. It's just my relationship with myself hasn't lended itself to healthy expressions of these emotions, right? And our identity is so malleable in that way, that you don't have to be the character that you're playing in the ring or out of the ring. Because believe me, we're playing characters to a very large degree. We have this thing, called the ego. We have this thing that's just a persona, this thing we put on to play with other people. But don't be confused and think that that's you in a fundamental sense. That you have a nature as a human animal, but you also have a lot of room to play it. Mm-hmm. And you're the author of your story, and you can sort of write it how you want to. I had a friend that he was a wrestler, and he would get panic attacks or anxiety attacks, one of the two, in real life. But he never got them when he wrestled. And I asked him about it. He goes, yeah, well, my character doesn't have an anxiety disorder. And it's, it just really hones in on how deeply psychological, like our whole thing is. That yes, you can create a character that doesn't have these problems for this period of time. Like, and he did that. And we all sort of can do that. We're sort of trapped in our own stuff. And you're allowed to play as someone else. You're allowed to play as you're allowed to show up and pretend you're someone else and then eventually become that someone else and realize that you're more than the composite of all your habits and behaviors, and you can change those habits and behaviors and sort of play around. And so write the best, be the best character that you want to be the character that you want to be. Yeah, and you don't need to hold on too tightly to who you think you are, because you're not.
Yeah. Thoughts on that, fellas? Thoughts on identity?
I mean, in sort of forming this identity, we touched briefly on perspective in a previous question. Personally, I think like our support systems and the things we choose to engage with very much shape our identity. So, Jimmy, I'm kind of curious, like, what's your practice in finding perspective? Is it purely relying on, various supports, or do you branch out in other ways?
What do you mean by branch out in other ways?
I don't know. Where do you tend to find where do you tend to look for alternative perspective? I guess is my question.
Yeah. So I have a few people in my life I trust. I have a few people in my life like I trust. When I say trust, I mean really, really trust. At the end of it, I make my calls though, and I have to trust me most of all. So I have to be open. I hold that as sort of one of my sort of fundamental ways of looking at the world, is going like, my knowledge of reality is somewhat inaccurate and mostly incomplete. Like I hold that as sort of like at the base of things, those two things. So I always do my best to keep room for my wrongness. I've been wrong and dumb so many times in my past. And so to think that I have it figured out, like everything I've said over the last in this conversation is just my perspective from where I'm at right now. But yeah, I've got a few people that I really trust, that I will confide in, I'll seek counsel with. And at the end of the day, I have to sort of go to myself to make my decisions and trust me that that's the right thing.
Identity is another thing that I think about, often. And I've come up with let me hear what you think of this, Jimmy. Come up with a definition of identity. Okay, I've defined identity as repeated beingness. So, which fits pretty good into your, I can play sort of any role, any character, but who am I being in those moments, which really means what virtues am I embodying? So if I have a core tenet of, I don't know, 3 to 5 virtues, then if I'm being those things, then that's my identity. I'm being kind, respectful, authentic, genuine, whatever it is. Like there's a list of virtues that you can have. So for me, if I'm coaching baseball or doing a podcast or doing this mental health webinar, I'm still being those virtues, I hope. Like, of course, it doesn't come across all the time, right? Not perfect, but that's my identity, malleable, changing, depending on the role or the room that I'm in or things like that. But it's not inauthentic because it is my beingness, in my being mode. And so, what do you think of that? It's resonated with me.
I like that a lot. And identity is important. So I don't want to make it seem like it's like, oh, it's just a costume you put on. But to me, it is a bit of a costume you put on. But you have to put on a costume to play a game, right? Like I have to put on the costume of pro wrestler to play the game of pro wrestler. Now at some point, and that identity of pro wrestler will serve me in many ways, and it's the structure of the identity. It's that masculine principle of giving structure to me. Will it confine me as well? Yes, it will confine me. If I go, I'm a pro wrestler, that's what I am. This is what I am. I'm a pro wrestler. This is what I'll do. A pro wrestler. Is it confining? Yes, but it gives me the structure in order to play the game we call being a pro wrestler. Now, at some point in my life, and this is what happens with all identity, is you will start to outgrow the costume. This is what I've found. And at some point, the thing that allowed you to expand and become something and be something will eventually become too tight on you. and we have this proclivity to try to keep this suit on once it's become too tight and we've outgrown the suit, because it serves us to a point. But eventually then the identity comes off, going, you know, I'm not a pro wrestler. It's something I do, but it's not who I am. Now who am I? And we sort of keep on putting on these new different costumes in order to have, it's the thing that allows us to have new experiences. It's the structure that allows us to have new experience. And but if kept on too long, it confines us too much. I say it's kind of like the crest of a wave. It's like you ride the identity out, and you want to get off before the wave sort of takes you up. Sort of get off and go, oh, I rode the ride of pro wrestler. It served me well. I rode the ride of drug addict. It was a fine ride for me, but it's time for it to be done. You know, I rode the ride of being a emotionally unavailable boyfriend, but I don't need that anymore. And sometimes even we put on the costume of going, oh, I'm a good person, and you do your best to be a good person. At some point, the definition of good person doesn't even work for you anymore. You know, I don't need to be a good person. I don't need this. Even these things we can think of as virtuous, at some point go, well, like okay, if you don't mind, I'll tell this. So I was a year out of rehab, and I had been wanting to take acid for about 6 months. And then, you know, I hear in rehab, oh, don't do it. You know, it's your addict brain talking and all sort of stuff. But finally I sit down and go, you know what, I'm taking acid. And I took acid, and it was great. It was awesome. And I went to myself, I wish I would have done this 6 months ago. And in this experience, I saw that I had this new identity that I had put on called sober guy. And sober guy liked it when he got to say, I'm this many days clean, I'm this many months sober, and he saw the ego, the character, the persona of sober guy would get boosted up by these new things. And look, it's way better to have the character, have the identity of sober guy, than it is to be, you know, shoving pills up your butt on the bathroom floor guy. Like, way better over here. But at the end of the day, it was like, oh, this is just another identity that isn't true. It isn't what I am. And my journey at that point in my life, doing my best to discover what is it that I am. I was like, oh, I don't need to go, oh, I'm sober guy. I don't need to hold on to the grip of what people think sobriety is or isn't, and play that character anymore. Yeah, and so that's just an example of sort of a what you would think is a good character to go, oh, that's okay. I don't need to hold on to this anymore. I'm allowed to break free from that if I want to.
Beautiful. Carl?
Sounds so much like a cocoon, right? Throughout your life, you get these different opportunities to kind of shed that cocoon and become the butterfly that all that work went into, you know, and it seems like you've gotten to really enjoy the butterflies that you've gotten to be over these past few years. Yeah,
and I think, you know, we all do if we allow that flow to happen. You know, if we don't grasp on for life or death, as if it's a matter of life or death, going, no, this is what I am. And it's like, this is the character I'm playing. I don't want to be another character.
Let the metamorphosis happen.
Yeah, and if you go with the flow of life a little bit more, yeah, there's ease in that, but it comes with acceptance. It comes with acceptance of not seeing yourself as the person, as the ego, as the thing that you think you are most of your life. It's letting go of that and accepting that the nature of reality itself is change. And so there's nothing to be scared of with change in a very fundamental sense, even though that is like the base fear, I think, of every human being is ultimately like something like fear of the unknown, right? I mean, that's really what it is. But I've done my best to sort of transmute the fear of the unknown into the excitement of possibilities, right? It's a working relationship, but I'm doing my best.
Yeah,
Love it. Love it so much.
that's beautiful. Does anyone have any closing thoughts, comments, questions, concerns, anecdotes, funny stories to wrap us up?
I mean, in terms of funny stories, when I was first starting out at the gym where I first started training, Jimmy walked in one time with Colt Cabana, and Jimmy, you had said, "Hey, can I just see you guys wrestle? Can I see a match?" Totally shit the bed in front of you.
Where was this?
This was Wrestle League in Chicago. It was just off of North Elston.
And I walked in with Colt Cabana.
I believe you were with Colt Cabana, yes.
Huh.
This was easily over 5 years ago.
It must have been when I was living in Chicago. Yeah.
I'm assuming so, yes.
There was a school I remember visiting. I don't remember if Cabana was with me, but I remember visiting like a school. Just was it in like kind of like a boxing gym?
Yes, it was.
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
That was me, brother.
okay. Yeah, I remember doing that at least. Yeah.
Yeah.
Was that at least pleasant?
Oh, incredibly so. I thought it was a joy. It's an absolute pleasure to get to meet you. But it was just before we got started today, I'm like, how these circles become full.
That's good. Not all stories of me in the past are pleasant. So like when everyone says like we met before, I'm like, oh yeah, how was it? You know.
I believe me. I have nothing to say negative about you, only about my performance that night.
It's all right, man.
Well, I only have a positive regard for you, Jimmy. So,
and likewise, man, I really admire what you're doing.